Imagine a peaceful town where people greet each other by name, where streets are lined with history and tradition, but beneath that calm surface, tensions simmer that few dares to acknowledge. Now, imagine being a respected judge in that very town, someone who has dedicated his life to fairness and justice, only to be pulled over and treated like a criminal on your way home. For Judge Ethan Carter, what began as a routine evening drive turned into a moment that would challenge everything he believed about justice, not inside the courtroom, but out in the world he thought he knew so well. The officer's assumptions, the community's reactions, and his own quiet resolve set the stage for an extraordinary journey, one that would test the strength of resilience, the courage to forgive, and the power of second chances. But how does a man who upholds the law respond when he becomes the victim of its failure? And can one moment of humility from an unexpected source spark real, lasting change? Judge Ethan Carter leaned back into the smooth leather seat of his brand-new silver Mercedes. The soft hum of jazz played through the speakers as he navigated the familiar streets of Fairford, a quiet suburban town known for its tree-lined avenues and stately homes. The streetlights cast a warm glow on the road ahead as he took a deep breath, letting the events of the day fade away. It had been another long day in court. Case after case, dispute after dispute, each requiring his undivided attention and measured judgment. Now, as he drove home, the weight on his shoulders lightened. His house stood at the end of Maplewood Lane, a stately but modest colonial-style home that he shared with his wife, Olivia. Their children had moved out years ago, chasing their dreams in different states, but the home still carried echoes of laughter and shared dinners. As he approached the last turn toward home, the sudden glare of flashing blue and red lights pierced the calm of the evening. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he instinctively glanced at his rearview mirror. The unmistakable sight of a police cruiser tailing him made his pulse quicken. Ethan furrowed his brow. He was not speeding. His car was in perfect condition. Confused but composed, he slowed the car to a stop by the curb, turned off the radio, and rolled down his window. A wave of unease crept in, but he reminded himself to stay calm. A tall, broad-shouldered officer approached, her hand resting near her holstered weapon. Her face was expressionless, her eyes scanning him with cold scrutiny. The name tag on her uniform reads, Harper. "License and registration," she said, her voice sharp and devoid of any greeting. Ethan nodded politely and reached for the glove compartment, moving deliberately so as not to alarm her. "Here you go, officer," he said, handing over the documents. "Is there a problem?" Harper barely glanced at him as she scanned his license and registration. "This vehicle matches the description of a car reported stolen last week." Ethan felt the familiar ache of disbelief settle in his chest. The calm exterior he had perfected over the years as a judge threatened to crack. "Officer Harper, I understand you are doing your job, but this is my car. I purchased it last week from the dealership in town. If you check the plates, you will see everything is in order." Her gaze hardened. "Step out of the car." For a moment, Ethan sat still, stunned by the command. He knew this was no ordinary stop. He could feel it in the way her hand rested a little too closely to her weapon, in the distrust that filled the space between them. "Is that necessary?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "It was not a request," she replied, stepping back to give him space. Ethan's mind raced. He had presided over dozens of cases involving situations like this, yet now he was the one standing on the side of the road, subject to suspicion, despite everything he had achieved. Swallowing his pride and frustration, he opened the door and stepped out. The cool evening air wrapped around him as he stood beside his car. Harper moved around him slowly, inspecting him as though he was something dangerous. "Hands on the hood," she ordered. A wave of humiliation washed over Ethan, but he complied, placing his hands on the sleek metal surface. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching from nearby houses. Curtains shifted slightly in the windows of the homes along the street. Neighbors were watching, witnessing him being reduced to nothing more than a suspect in front of the people who knew him as a respected judge. "Officer Harper," Ethan said calmly, "I would advise you to contact your superior before making a decision you might regret." She hesitated, her jaw tightening. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but she quickly reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Harper. I need a status check on the license plate I sent in." The seconds felt like hours as they stood in tense silence. The radio crackled to life, and a clear voice came through. "Stand down immediately, Harper. Judge Ethan Carter is a respected member of the judiciary. Captain Reynolds is on his way." Harper's face flushed with embarrassment as she lowered her radio. She took a step back, her previous confidence replaced with awkwardness. "I am sorry, Judge Carter," she muttered. "There was a misunderstanding." Ethan straightened, adjusting his jacket. He took a deep breath, willing himself to stay composed. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, his voice calm but firm. "Is that what we are calling this now?" Harper looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Before she could respond, another cruiser pulled up. Captain Reynolds, an older man with graying hair and a thoughtful expression, stepped out and approached quickly. "Ethan," Reynolds said, his voice full of regret, "I cannot begin to apologize enough for this. I assure you, we will address this incident properly." Ethan nodded slowly, but kept his thoughts guarded. "Thank you, Captain," he replied. "But I would like to have a discussion about how we can prevent this from happening again, not just to me, but to anyone in this community." Captain Reynolds looked surprised, but nodded respectfully. "Of course. Let us talk soon." As the tension in the air began to dissipate, Ethan climbed back into his car, started the engine, and resumed his drive home. The familiar streets felt different now, as though a veil had been lifted, revealing a truth he could no longer ignore. When he finally pulled into his driveway, Olivia was waiting at the door, concern etched into her face. Ethan stepped out and walked into her embrace, letting the warmth of home soothe the ache in his heart. As they sat together in the quiet of their living room, Ethan shared every detail of what had happened. Olivia listened without interruption, her eyes full of quiet strength. "You have always stood for justice," she said softly, taking his hand. "Maybe this is your chance to lead not just in court, but here in this town." Ethan squeezed her hand, the weight of her words settling in his heart. He knew she was right. This was not just a moment of pain, it was a call to action. And Ethan Carter had never been one to ignore a call for justice. The next morning, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as sunlight poured through the windows. Ethan Carter sat at the breakfast table, staring at the untouched cup in front of him. Olivia sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her own mug. "You did everything right," she said gently, breaking the silence. "But that does not make it any less painful." Ethan sighed, his fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "It was not just about me, Livy. It was the way she looked at me, as if I could not possibly belong in that car, on that street." He paused, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. 40 years of hard work, of striving to do the right thing, and in her eyes, I was still a suspect. Olivia reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "So, what are you going to do?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Captain Reynolds invited me to meet with him. I will go. This cannot be swept under the rug. It is not just about what happened to me. It is about what it represents." Olivia's eyes softened. "You are brave, Ethan. I know you will make a difference." Her faith in him steadied his resolve. After finishing breakfast, Ethan put on a crisp suit and left the house, the events of the previous night replaying in his mind. The police station was a stark contrast to the courthouse, where Ethan was used to commanding respect. The walls were lined with photographs of officers receiving commendations and group photos of patrol units. The sound of ringing phones and hurried conversations filled the air. Captain Reynolds greeted him at the entrance, his handshake firm but his eyes full of remorse. "Thank you for coming, Judge Carter. Let us talk in my office." Ethan nodded, following Reynolds through the busy hallway. Harper was standing near the front desk, speaking with another officer. She froze when she noticed Ethan. Their eyes met briefly, hers filled with unease, his calm but unwavering. She looked away quickly. Once inside the office, Reynolds closed the door and gestured for Ethan to sit. "Before we begin," Reynolds started, leaning forward, "I want you to know how deeply sorry I am. What happened last night was unacceptable." Ethan appreciated the sincerity in Reynolds's tone, but he knew apologies alone would not be enough. "I believe you, Captain. But this is not just about one incident. You know that as well as I do." Reynolds nodded gravely. "You are right. We have a problem, a systemic one, and I want to fix it." Ethan's eyes sharpened. "Then let us fix it together. I have an idea." Reynolds listened intently as Ethan laid out his vision. A town hall meeting where the community and police could have open, honest conversations. Ethan suggested that officers undergo training in de-escalation and unconscious bias, and that citizens be invited to share their stories and concerns. "These programs work when they come from a place of education, not blame," Ethan explained. "We need to show people that change is possible on both sides." Reynolds leaned back, considering the proposal. "It will not be easy. There will be resistance from both the department and the community." Ethan nodded. "I am not asking for easy. I am asking for necessary." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Reynolds called out, "Come in." The door opened, and Officer Harper stepped inside. Her posture was stiff, but there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Sir," she began, glancing nervously at Ethan, "I wanted to apologize again. Judge Carter, I was wrong." Ethan studied her face, noting the hesitation beneath her formal tone. She looked different now, not the authority figure who had commanded him out of the car, but someone struggling to understand the gravity of her actions. "I appreciate your apology, Officer Harper," Ethan said calmly, "but I need to ask you something. Why did you assume the worst about me?" Harper's face flushed, and she took a deep breath. I thought I was following procedure, but I see now that I made assumptions about you, about the situation, and that was wrong." She paused, looking directly at him. "I want to do better." The room was silent for a moment before Ethan spoke again. "You are here now, which means you are willing to listen. That is a good start." Reynolds broke the silence, his voice measured. "Judge Carter has proposed a town hall meeting to open up dialogue between the community and the department. I would like you to attend, Harper." Harper's eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," Reynolds said firmly. "You need to be part of this conversation." Ethan added, "The only way we grow is by facing the things that make us uncomfortable. This is not about punishment. It is about progress." Harper hesitated, then nodded. "I will be there." The town hall was scheduled for the following week, and word spread quickly. On the night of the event, the community center was packed with residents, reporters, and officers. Ethan stood at the podium scanning the room. He saw familiar faces, neighbors, local business owners, and even Marcus, a young man who had once shared his own story of a wrongful stop. Ethan cleared his throat, and the murmurs in the room quieted. "Good evening," he began. "My name is Judge Ethan Carter. I am here not as a judge tonight, but as a member of this community, someone who has experienced firsthand what it means to be misjudged." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But this is not just about me. This is about all of us, our fears, our assumptions, and our hope for a better future. We are here tonight to listen, to learn, and to begin rebuilding trust." The room was silent, every face attentive. When he stepped back, Officer Harper took a hesitant step forward. She gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles white. "I am Officer Harper," she began. "Some of you know who I am because of what happened last week. I made a mistake. I let fear and assumptions guide my actions, and for that, I am sorry." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "I want to be part of the change Judge Carter is talking about. I know that trust cannot be rebuilt with words alone. It will take action, and I am ready to do the work." The silence in the room broke with applause, not overwhelming, but sincere. Ethan felt a swell of something he had not felt in days: hope. As he sat down, Olivia reached for his hand from the front row, her eyes shining. In that moment, Ethan knew they had taken the first step towards something greater. The road ahead would be long, but they had begun. The morning sun spilled through the windows of Ethan Carter's study, casting a golden glow on the rows of legal books that lined the shelves. The town hall had been the first step, but the echoes of the night lingered in his mind. Some had applauded Officer Harper's vulnerability, while others remained skeptical. Ethan understood their hesitation. Change, after all, was a fragile thing. Seated at his desk, Ethan absently traced the edge of a framed photograph of him and Olivia on their anniversary in Napa Valley. His phone buzzed beside him, a text from Marcus, the young man who had approached him after the meeting. "Thank you for last night. People like me finally feel seen." Ethan's chest tightened as he reread the message. He was grateful, yet the pressure weighed heavy. Every decision felt like a balancing act between progress and resistance. Olivia walked in, holding a cup of tea. "You've been staring at that phone for a while," she said, placing the cup beside him. "Marcus sent me a message," Ethan replied, his voice thoughtful. "He thanked me for making him feel seen." Olivia smiled softly. "That sounds like something you needed to hear." Ethan nodded. "It does, but there is still so much work to do. I saw the way some people looked at Harper. They wanted to believe her, but trust is not given easily, not after what they have been through." Olivia leaned against the desk, her gaze steady. "That is why what you are doing matters. People will see your sincerity, Ethan. They always have." Her words were a balm to his restless thoughts. "I hope you are right," he said, taking a sip of the tea. Later that morning, Ethan arrived at the courthouse for another full day of hearings. The steps leading up to the grand marble entrance were bustling with people, lawyers in crisp suits, nervous plaintiffs, and reporters hungry for a story. Ethan had always walked up those steps with quiet confidence. But today, the air felt different. As he reached the top, a familiar voice called out, "Judge Carter!" He turned to see Captain Reynolds approaching, his usually composed face shadowed with concern. "I am glad I caught you." Ethan raised a brow. "Is something wrong?" Reynolds motioned for them to step aside. "I received a few concerning calls after last night. Some officers are not happy about the town hall." Ethan folded his arms. "I expected some resistance. What are they saying?" Reynolds sighed. "Some feel that the outreach program makes them look weak, that it paints all officers as the enemy. They do not see it as a chance to improve. They see it as an attack." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It is not about blaming anyone. It is about accountability and understanding. Surely they can see that." Reynolds shook his head. "For some, it is not that simple." He paused, lowering his voice. "I thought you should know. There is a petition circulating among a small group of officers asking for the program to be shut down." The words settled between them like a stone. Ethan felt a surge of frustration, but quickly reined it in. "So, what happens now?" Reynolds met his gaze. "We keep moving forward. The program is important, and I believe in it. But I will not lie to you. It is going to be a fight." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then we fight." The afternoon passed in a blur of court proceedings, but Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the petition. When he finally stepped out of the courthouse, the late afternoon sky was streaked with hues of pink and gold. As he made his way to the parking lot, he noticed a young woman struggling with a stroller near the entrance. Without hesitation, he crossed the street and approached her. "Do you need a hand?" he asked. She looked up, surprised but grateful. "Yes, please. The front wheel keeps sticking." Ethan bent down and adjusted the wheel until it clicked into place. "There you go," he said, stepping back as the woman smiled in relief. "Thank you so much," she said. Not many people would stop to help. Ethan smiled warmly. It is the small kindnesses that matter most. She hesitated, then added, "I know who you are. I was at the town hall last night. What you said. It meant a lot." Ethan felt a flicker of surprise. "Thank you. What did you think of Officer Harper?" The woman's expression softened. She seemed sincere. "But it will take time. Trust is fragile." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, it is." She gave him a final nod of appreciation before continuing on her way. Ethan watched her go, her words settling in his mind. Trust is fragile. That evening, as the town settled into its familiar nighttime quiet, Ethan sat on his porch with Olivia. Fireflies danced in the warm air, their soft glow like tiny lanterns. "I saw something today," he said, breaking the silence. "A small moment of kindness. And it reminded me that progress does not always come in big waves. It is built in quiet moments when people choose to care." Olivia smiled. "You have always known that. Maybe now the town is beginning to see it too." Ethan leaned back, letting the hum of the night wash over him. "We have to keep going, Liv. No matter how many petitions or doubts come our way, we have to believe in this." She took his hand in hers. "And I believe in you." For the first time in days, Ethan felt a lightness in his chest, a reminder that even in the face of resistance, hope could still shine through. As he watched the stars blink to life above Fairford, he knew that the road ahead would be long, but as long as there were people willing to listen, willing to change, the journey would be worth it. The courthouse was quiet that morning. The usual shuffle of papers and murmured conversations seemed distant as Ethan Carter prepared for the meeting at the police station. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, his expression calm but resolute. Olivia walked into the room, her face thoughtful. "You know they will try to challenge you today," she said softly, resting a hand on his shoulder. Ethan met her eyes in the mirror. "I know. But if I back down now, this whole effort will unravel. I need them to see that this is not about blame, it is about making things better for everyone." Olivia nodded. "Then remind them who you are. You are not just a judge. You are someone who believes in fairness." He gave her a small smile, grateful for her unwavering support. "I will." At the station, the tension was palpable as Ethan walked through the front doors. Officers who usually greeted him with polite nods now watched him with wary eyes. The whispers stopped as he passed, but the weight of their scrutiny lingered. Captain Reynolds was waiting near the conference room and gave Ethan a reassuring nod. "Ready?" "As I will ever be," Ethan replied, stepping inside. The room was filled with a mix of department leaders and patrol officers. At the center of the long table sat Officer Harper, her face tense but determined. She had changed since the night of the stop, her guarded demeanor now softened by an understanding of her role in what happened. Ethan took his seat across from her, while Captain Reynolds began the meeting. "We are here to have an honest conversation about where we go from here," Reynolds said. "Judge Carter has offered his time to help us move forward." One of the senior officers, a man named Late Monroe, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "With all due respect, Captain, some of us feel this program paints us in a bad light. We are not the enemy." Ethan nodded, acknowledging Monroe's frustration. "I understand why you might feel that way. But let me be clear, this is not about calling anyone the enemy. It is about making sure that situations like the one between Officer Harper and me never happen again. It is about accountability, not blame. Another officer spoke up, her voice hesitant but firm. People do not trust us right now. They see one mistake and think it is who we are. Ethan leaned forward, his tone calm but purposeful. Trust is a fragile thing, but it is also something we build brick by brick. This program is not about highlighting failures. It is about making sure that when you wear that badge, the people you protect feel safe. That trust begins with you, and it can begin today. The room was silent for a moment as the officers absorbed his words. Harper finally broke the silence. "I made a mistake that night," she said, looking around the table. "But what I have learned since then has changed me. I was scared, and that fear made me assume the worst. I do not want to be that kind of officer." Lawing. Monroe frowned but softened as he listened. Harper's admission was raw, but it came from a place of honesty. Ethan could see the shift in some of the officers' faces, a flicker of understanding, even if they were not ready to say it out loud. Captain Reynolds spoke again. "We have to ask ourselves, what kind of department do we want to be? We can either build a wall between us and the community, or we can build a bridge." Ethan met their eyes. "I am not asking you to give up your pride or your duty. I am asking you to recognize the power you have, not just to enforce the law, but to uphold the humanity behind it." The meeting lasted over an hour, with some officers speaking candidly about their fears and frustrations. By the end, there was no unanimous agreement, but there was something far more important, a willingness to keep the conversation going. As the meeting concluded, Harper approached Ethan. "Thank you for giving me the chance to speak. I was not sure anyone would listen to me after what happened." Ethan offered her a small but sincere smile. "The fact that you showed up today speaks volumes. People will listen because they can see that you mean it." Harper nodded. "I want to do better." "I believe you," Ethan said. Outside the station, the air felt lighter despite the uphill battle ahead. Ethan walked toward his car, taking in the familiar sights of Fairford, the bakery where he and Olivia often grabbed pastries, the bookstore with its cozy display of local authors. It all reminded him of why he was fighting so hard for this change. As he reached his car, a voice called out behind him, "Judge Carter." He turned to see Marcus approaching, a determined look on his face. "I heard you were meeting with the police today," Marcus said, slightly out of breath. "How did it go?" Ethan gave a thoughtful nod. "It went better than I expected. Not perfect, but it is a start." Marcus shifted his weight, his hands in his pockets. "I wanted to thank you again. You did not have to stand up for us, but you did." Ethan studied the young man for a moment. "Marcus, it is not about standing up for some and not others. It is about standing up for fairness for all of us." Marcus's face softened, and he nodded. "That means a lot, sir." Ethan clasped Marcus's shoulder. "You have a voice, too. Do not forget that." As Marcus walked away, Ethan felt a sense of reassurance. Kindness, both given and received, could ripple outward in unexpected ways. Ethan climbed into his car, his heart steadied by the progress made that day. There would be setbacks, but every small step mattered. As he drove home, the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the road. But Ethan was not focused on the shadows. He was focused on the light breaking through. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, hearings, and quiet moments of reflection. Ethan Carter spent his evenings reviewing case notes in his study, but his thoughts often drifted back to the conversation at the police station. The resistance from some officers had been palpable, but so was the quiet hope he had seen in others, especially Officer Harper. One evening, while the house was quiet and the warm scent of Olivia's cooking filled the air, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was Captain Reynolds. "The town council has approved the town hall series. First one is scheduled for next week. Can you make the opening speech?" Ethan read the message twice before responding. "I'll be there." He placed the phone down and rubbed his temples. The approval was a victory, but he knew that a public forum would be a double-edged sword. Some people would come with open minds, but others would arrive carrying years of distrust, frustration, and anger. Still, it was a step forward, a chance to create something meaningful. The night of the first town hall arrived quickly. The community center's main hall buzzed with conversation as residents filed in, filling the rows of folding chairs. The air was thick with anticipation. Ethan stood near the back of the room, observing the crowd. He recognized neighbors, shop owners, and teachers from the local high school. But there were also unfamiliar faces, people from neighborhoods he knew had felt the sting of unfair treatment for far too long. Captain Reynolds approached, adjusting the lapel of his uniform. "Full house?" he said, scanning the room. Ethan nodded. "It shows how much people care, but it also shows how deep the wounds run." Reynolds gave a short sigh. "Let's hope this can start some healing." When the clock struck 7, the room quieted as Captain Reynolds stepped up to the podium. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight," he began. His voice was strong, but carried an edge of humility. "This meeting is about honesty and accountability from both sides. We are here to listen, to learn, and to make changes that will strengthen our community." Reynolds glanced at Ethan, who walked up to join him. The room stirred as Ethan approached the podium. Some looked curious, others wary. Ethan cleared his throat and began. "For those of you who may not know me, I am Judge Ethan Carter. I've lived in this community for over 20 years, and I have dedicated my life to upholding justice. But recently, I was reminded that justice does not always meet us where we expect it to. Sometimes we have to fight for it." He paused, scanning the room. His eyes landed briefly on Marcus, who sat in the second row, listening intently. "We're not here to point fingers. We're here to make things better for you, for your families, and for the people sworn to protect you." The room was quiet as Ethan's words settled over them. He took a deep breath. "We can't change the past, but we can change what comes next. And that change starts with understanding." He stepped back as the applause began, not thunderous, but steady. Olivia, seated near the front, smiled at him, her eyes brimming with pride. The first speaker from the audience was an older man named Mr. Caldwell. His face was weathered, and his voice trembled with emotion. "I've lived in this town all my life," he began, "but I never thought I'd live to see a meeting like this. My grandson was stopped 3 times last year for fitting a description. He's 17, just a kid. How do we rebuild trust when that's the kind of fear we're living with?" There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his expression somber. "Mr. Caldwell, I hear you, and I'm sorry for what your family has been through. We can't erase what happened, but we can take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's why we're working on new training programs and transparency measures." Mr. Caldwell nodded, though the weight of his grief remained. The next to speak was a middle-aged woman named Clara, who owned the corner cafe. "I just want to say that I appreciate what Judge Carter and Captain Reynolds are doing," she said, her voice steady. "But we can't have progress without accountability. Are the officers who make these mistakes being held responsible?" Ethan stepped forward again. "Accountability is essential, but real accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure those mistakes don't happen again. It's about teaching officers to see the people they serve as neighbors, not threats." There were nods of agreement from many in the crowd. Then, something unexpected happened. Officer Harper stood up from the back of the room and made her way to the podium. A hush fell over the crowd. She adjusted the microphone and took a breath. "I'm Officer Harper. I was the one who stopped Judge Carter that night." A ripple of whispers spread through the room, but Harper held her ground. "I'm not proud of what I did. I've asked myself over and over why I made the choices I made that night. And the truth is, I was afraid. But fear is not an excuse. It's a flaw I have to fix, and I'm trying." The room was completely silent as she continued. "I didn't come here tonight to make excuses. I came here to say that I'm learning. And I'm committed to doing better, not because someone told me to, but because I believe it's the right thing to do." When she stepped back, there was a moment of stillness before a few hands began to clap. The sound spread until the room erupted in applause. Ethan felt a surge of pride, not just for Harper, but for everyone who had chosen to show up, to listen, and to speak. After the meeting, Marcus caught Ethan outside as the crowd began to disperse. "She surprised me," Marcus said. "I didn't think she'd stand up there like that." Ethan smiled. "Neither did I. But sometimes people surprise you for better or worse. Tonight, it was for the better." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe things really can change." Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. "They can. But it takes time, and people willing to do the work." As he watched Marcus walk away, Ethan turned toward the glowing windows of the community center. Inside, people lingered, talking and connecting in ways that felt different. Hope had started to take root. The night of the first town hall felt like a turning point for many. For Ethan Carter, it was a reminder that progress was possible but fragile. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with conversation. Some praised the meeting for opening long overdue dialogue, while others remained skeptical. Still, the fact that Officer Harper had stood up and admitted her mistake became a focal point. At the courthouse, Ethan's usual routine resumed: hearings, consultations, and the steady flow of legal cases. Yet he could not shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding outside those courtroom walls. When he returned home one evening, Olivia was already setting the table for dinner. "You've been quiet today," she said, glancing at him as she arranged the silverware. Ethan sat down, rubbing his temples. "It is just that moment when Harper spoke. I did not expect it. She could have stayed quiet, but she owned her mistake. And because of that, people listened." Olivia poured water into their glasses and sat across from him. "That is why this matters, Ethan. People are not just listening to you anymore. They are listening to each other." Her words settled in his chest, warm and reassuring. "You are right. I just hope it lasts." "It will," Olivia said confidently, "because you are not forcing anyone. You are inviting them to be better." The next morning, Ethan arrived at the community center for a follow-up meeting with the police leadership team. The bright mid-morning sun bathed the town square in golden light as people milled about, waving to one another. It felt like a new day, in more ways than one. As he entered the meeting room, Captain Reynolds greeted him with a firm handshake. "We have been getting feedback from the officers," Reynolds said, as they took their seats. "Some of it positive, some not so much." Ethan smiled wryly. "I did not expect glowing reviews." Reynolds nodded, his expression serious. "But there is one thing I wanted you to know. Harper volunteered to lead the next outreach session. I did not ask her. She came to me." Ethan's eyebrows rose. "Really?" Reynolds nodded. "She said she wanted to do more than just talk. She wants to show the community that she means what she said." Ethan leaned back in his chair, absorbing the news. Harper's transformation was unexpected, but it reaffirmed his belief that people were capable of change. "That is impressive," Ethan said thoughtfully. "It takes courage to lead, especially after making a mistake." "She is learning," Reynolds agreed, "and I think the rookies could learn from her honesty." The following week, the first outreach session for new recruits took place at the community center. Young officers in crisp uniforms filled the room, their eyes curious and cautious. They had heard whispers of the controversy surrounding the program, but now they were here to see it firsthand. Ethan entered quietly and took a seat in the back as Harper stood at the front of the room, her posture steady but humble. She looked out at the room, her face calm but determined. "Good morning," she began. "You all know my name by now, and I am sure you have heard about what happened between me and Judge Carter." There was a ripple of shifting in the seats, but no one spoke. I am not going to stand here and pretend I am proud of that night, Harper continued, but I am here to tell you what I learned from it. She took a deep breath. Fear makes you see threats where there are none. Assumptions turn good people into poor decision makers, and the only way to stop that cycle is to confront those assumptions head on. One of the recruits, a young man with sandy blonde hair, raised his hand. Officer Harper, what changed for you? Why did you come here today instead of hiding from it all? Harper smiled faintly, though her eyes glimmered with sincerity. I chose to come here because I did not want to be defined by my mistake, and I do not want you to learn the hard way like I did. Ethan watched as the room grew quiet, the recruits hanging on Harper's every word. She spoke about humility, about the responsibility that came with the badge, and about the power of apology not as a sign of weakness, but as a sign of growth. When the session ended, the recruits lined up to shake her hand. Some offered her quiet words of thanks, others simply nodded in respect. Ethan felt a rare but unmistakable sense of pride, not only in Harper, but in the seeds of change taking root in these young minds. As the room emptied, Harper noticed Ethan standing near the door. She approached, her expression soft but curious. How did I do? Ethan smiled. You did more than I ever could. You showed them what courage looks like. Harper's face relaxed, the hint of a smile forming. I used to think courage was about being unshakable, but now I see it is about admitting when you are wrong and trying to make it right. You are right, Ethan said, and you are making it right. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself back at his usual spot at the local coffee shop. He sat by the window, watching people pass by as he sipped his cappuccino. The bell above the door chimed, and Marcus walked in, his eyes lighting up when he saw Ethan. Judge Carter, Marcus greeted him with a grin. Mind if I join you? Of course, Ethan said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Marcus sat down, taking a sip of his iced coffee. I heard about the rookie training session. People are really talking about Officer Harper. It is like, she is a different person. Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. In some ways, she is, but I think this version of her was always there. She just needed to see things from a different perspective. Marcus leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. I guess that means there is hope for anyone to change, huh? Ethan smiled. Yes, Marcus, there is always hope if they are willing to do the work. The two sat in comfortable silence, watching the town go about its day. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a quiet certainty settle in his heart. The work was far from over, but every small victory brought them closer to a stronger, more compassionate community. The outreach program began to gather momentum. Word spread across Fairford as more town residents signed up for the dialogue sessions, eager to share their stories and listen to others. The initial wariness between some officers and community members had softened. Small changes were beginning to show a nod of acknowledgement during patrols, brief but sincere conversations at local stores. Ethan Carter watched it all unfold with a quiet but cautious sense of hope. The program was doing what he had envisioned, creating space for people to see each other as human beings, not labels. But he also knew that progress was fragile and that setbacks were inevitable. The latest session was held at the community center on a rainy Thursday evening. The steady rhythm of raindrops on the roof provided a quiet backdrop as people shuffled into their seats. Ethan and Captain Reynolds stood at the front of the room, reviewing notes while Officer Harper greeted attendees. A man named Greg Hollis, a retired teacher who had lived in Fairford for over 30 years, stood up to speak. Greg was known for his fairness and calm demeanor, but tonight his face was lined with sadness. I never thought I would be here, Greg began, his voice steady but somber. Last year, my nephew was visiting from Boston. He was stopped by police 3 times in one weekend while running errands. He called me afterward and asked, Uncle Greg, am I ever just going to be seen as me? I didn't know how to answer him. The room was silent, the weight of Greg's story settling over everyone. Ethan nodded, stepping forward. That is why we are here to confront those questions head-on, even when they are hard. Your nephew's story is not just his. It is the story of too many people in our community. And it is our responsibility to make sure that one day the answer to his question is yes. A few seats away, Marcus gave an approving nod, his expression thoughtful. When the floor opened for questions, a young officer named Jenkins raised his hand. Judge Carter, I want to do right by this community. But how do I balance that with keeping myself safe out there? Sometimes fear creeps in before I can stop it. Ethan met Jenkins's gaze with empathy. That fear is real. I will never deny that. But the key is learning how to respond to it without letting it cloud your judgment. Training helps, yes, but so does connection. The more you know the people you serve, the less they feel like strangers. And strangers are always the scariest. Officer Harper spoke up next. He is right. I was where you are. I let fear control me once, but I have learned that connection is the best shield against that fear. After the session, small groups of attendees lingered, continuing their conversations. Ethan walked toward the back of the room, where Greg Hollis stood by the refreshment table, deep in conversation with Officer Jenkins. Ethan paused, watching as Greg spoke with surprising patience, explaining his experiences without anger, and Jenkins listened attentively, nodding at key moments. It was a simple sight, a man sharing his pain, and an officer listening, but to Ethan, it was the beginning of something profound. He stepped closer and heard Greg say, I do not expect perfection. I just want to feel like my family belongs here as much as anyone else. Jenkins replied, I can understand that, and I want to be part of that change. Ethan felt a quiet sense of pride. This was exactly what he had hoped for. Conversations that were not performances, but genuine attempts to understand. The following morning, Ethan met with Captain Reynolds at the station. They reviewed feedback from the previous night's session. It is working, Reynolds said, though his voice carried a cautious tone. But not everyone is convinced. Ethan sat back in his chair. There will always be people who resist change. Some will never see the point of this program, but that does not mean it is not worth it. Reynolds nodded. I know, it is just, there are officers who are frustrated. They think this is making their job harder, not easier. Ethan folded his hands. What we are asking them to do is harder. It takes more than following procedure. It takes emotional intelligence, patience, and humility. But those are the things that build trust, not just authority. Reynolds let out a slow breath. I believe in this, Ethan. I do. But it is going to take time. It always does, Ethan agreed. But if we quit now, we will never know how much good we could have done. Later that afternoon, Ethan stopped by the local grocery store to pick up a few things for dinner. As he walked down the aisle, he heard a familiar voice behind him. Judge Carter? He turned to see Clara, the cafe owner who had spoken at the first town hall. She was holding a basket of fresh produce, her eyes bright. Ethan, please, he said with a smile. Clara chuckled. Okay, Ethan, I just wanted to tell you that what you are doing, it is making a difference. I saw Officer Jenkins chatting with some teens outside my cafe the other day, not patrolling, just talking to them. That has never happened before. Ethan's smile widened. That is wonderful to hear. Thank you for telling me. Clara nodded. I know things are not perfect yet, but it feels different, better. It does, Ethan agreed. As Clara walked away, Ethan felt a wave of reassurance. It was in the small moments, an officer taking the time to connect, a resident sharing their gratitude, that real change took shape. That evening, Ethan sat on the porch with Olivia as the sky faded into hues of lavender and gold. The sound of crickets filled the air, and the world felt calm. You are doing it, Olivia said, leaning against him. One conversation at a time. Ethan smiled softly. It is not just me, it is all of us. The fireflies blinked in the growing darkness, tiny beacons of light. And as Ethan watched them, he felt something stronger than hope. He felt belief. The road ahead would still be difficult, but Fairford was beginning to change. The following week, the atmosphere in Fairford shifted again. While many residents praised the outreach program, others grew louder in their criticism. Local blogs and social media posts began to surface with headlines like, "Soft Policing" or "Real Reform," and "Is the outreach program helping or hurting?" Ethan Carter read through the comments during his lunch break at the courthouse. Some were constructive, questioning how accountability would be enforced, but others were harsher, calling the program a waste of time and accusing him of being anti-police. A knock at his office door broke his focus. Olivia stepped in, holding a small to-go bag from their favorite deli downtown. "Thought you might need lunch?" she said with a warm smile. Ethan sighed and set his phone down. "Thank you. I needed more than lunch. I needed you." Olivia placed the food on his desk and leaned against the chair opposite him. "What is it?" He gestured to his phone. "The feedback. Some people feel hopeful, but others, not so much. It feels like for every step forward, there is someone trying to pull us back." Olivia tilted her head thoughtfully. "You expected resistance, Ethan. Change is uncomfortable for everyone." "I know," he said, rubbing his temples. "But the frustration is getting to me. I cannot help but wonder if we are moving fast enough or if we are just pushing too hard." Olivia reached across the desk and took his hand. "You have always said that real change does not happen all at once. It happens in pieces, in moments, and those moments add up." Her words anchored him, as they always did. The next outreach session felt more tense than usual. The room was filled, but there was an energy that Ethan could only describe as skeptical. Some residents who had previously stayed silent were now speaking out, frustrated by the slow pace of reform, unsure of what would really change. An older man named Mr. Randall, known for his outspoken nature, stood and addressed the room. "With all due respect, Judge Carter, these conversations are just words. My family has lived in Fairford for decades, and we've seen meetings like this come and go. Nothing ever changes." Ethan met Mr. Randall's sharp gaze with calm steadiness. "I hear your frustration, Mr. Randall," he replied. "And you are right. Words are not enough. But we have to start somewhere. The changes we make may seem small now, but they grow." Mr. Randall folded his arms. "Small changes do not feel like much when you are the one who is always questioned, always followed." A few people murmured in agreement. The tension thickened as the room waited for Ethan's response. Ethan exhaled, his voice clear but gentle. "Trust is built slowly, and I am not asking anyone to trust blindly. I am asking you to watch, to hold us accountable, to stay involved, and to make sure this is not just another empty promise. We need you as much as you need change." There was a pause before Marcus raised his hand. "I get what Mr. Randall is saying," Marcus began, turning toward the older man. "But I have also seen things shift. People like Officer Harper, they are trying. They are showing up. And I think that matters." Mr. Randall studied Marcus, his face softening. "I hope you are right, son," he said quietly before sitting down. The room relaxed as Marcus's words settled. Ethan gave Marcus a small nod of thanks. After the session, as attendees filtered out, Captain Reynolds approached Ethan, looking uneasy. "We've got a problem," he muttered. Ethan frowned. "What happened?" "One of the officers posted something online criticizing the program and calling it a PR stunt. It is gaining attention." Ethan sighed. "Who was it?" Reynolds hesitated before answering. "Lieutenant Monroe." Ethan's stomach sank. Monroe had been one of the most vocal skeptics, but he had also seemed willing to listen, at least at first. "What are you going to do?" Ethan asked. Reynolds's jaw tightened. "I will handle it internally. But this could undermine everything we are trying to build. Ethan nodded gravely. Then let's make sure it doesn't. We need transparency. If we pretend this did not happen, people will lose faith. Reynolds met Ethan's gaze and nodded. You are right. I will address it head on. The next day, the department issued a public statement acknowledging the incident and reaffirming their commitment to the program. Reynolds held a press conference, standing beside Ethan and Officer Harper as he spoke. There will always be voices of doubt, Reynolds said firmly. But this department stands behind the outreach program. We believe in accountability and growth, not as weaknesses, but as strengths. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashed, and the questions came in rapid succession. Ethan answered them calmly, emphasizing the importance of continuing the work despite the criticism. Later that evening, Ethan and Olivia took a walk through their neighborhood. The sky was clear, the stars bright above them. The cool breeze carried the scent of fresh rain from earlier that day. How are you feeling? Olivia asked, glancing up at him. Tired, Ethan admitted, but hopeful. They reached the corner where Marcus and his younger sister, Emma, were sitting on their porch steps. Marcus waved, and Ethan returned the gesture. You have made a real impact on that boy, Olivia said. Ethan smiled softly. He reminds me why I started this in the first place. As they continued walking, Olivia took his hand. You are planting seeds, Ethan, and seeds take time to grow. He squeezed her hand gently. I just hope the roots are strong enough. They will be, she assured him. The lights from nearby houses glowed softly, casting a warm golden hue across the street. Despite the resistance, despite the setbacks, Ethan knew they had come too far to turn back. The future was uncertain, but hope had taken root, and that was enough. The morning air was crisp as Ethan Carter pulled into the parking lot of the Fairford Community Center. It had been a long week filled with both progress and setbacks. The previous night's walk with Olivia had helped clear his mind, but the lingering frustration over Lieutenant Monroe's public criticism still gnawed at him. Ethan climbed out of his car and adjusted his coat, watching as a few early risers walked their dogs along the nearby path. The world seemed calm for the moment, but his mind buzzed with the weight of what was to come. Today, he had another meeting with community leaders, this time to discuss expanding the outreach program into the schools. As he approached the entrance, he heard someone call his name. Judge Carter? Ethan turned and saw a young man standing near the bench by the front steps. The man looked familiar, tall, wiry, with a hesitant but warm smile. His dark curly hair framed his face, and his posture carried an air of quiet uncertainty. Yes, Ethan replied, stepping closer. The young man smiled shyly. You may not remember me, but I remember you. He shifted nervously before continuing. My name is Devon. A couple of years ago, you presided over a case I was in. Ethan studied his face for a moment, and recognition flickered. Devon Parker. A name tied to a tough case involving a minor theft charge, a case Ethan had handled with particular care. Devon had been just 19 at the time, caught in the wrong crowd, but Ethan had seen potential in him. Instead of a harsh sentence, Ethan had given Devon the chance to complete community service and enroll in a local training program. Devon Parker, Ethan said, his voice steady but warm. I do remember you. Devon's smile widened. I figured you might. I wanted to say thank you for what you did back then. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Ethan nodded, his heart lifting. How have you been? Devon's eyes brightened as he spoke. Good, really good. I finished the training program last year and just got hired as an apprentice at a repair shop downtown. I am working toward becoming a certified mechanic. That is wonderful to hear, Ethan said, genuinely impressed. You did the hard work, Devon. I just gave you the chance. Devon shook his head. But that chance meant everything. You saw me when everyone else just saw a screw-up. His voice softened. I heard about what you are doing with the outreach program. It is inspiring. People are starting to feel like they belong here again. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. This was one of those moments Olivia had spoken about, proof that the small seeds of kindness could grow in unexpected ways. Thank you, Devon. That means more than you know. Devon shifted his weight, looking a little sheepish. If there is ever anything I can do to help volunteer, talk to other kids, just let me know. I want to give back, the way you gave to me. Ethan's smile was genuine and full of warmth. I will keep that in mind. We could use more voices like yours. Devon nodded, his face glowing with pride. They shook hands, and Ethan watched as Devon walked away, his stride confident and purposeful. The meeting with the community leaders went smoother than Ethan had expected. School principals and local youth advocates were receptive to the idea of expanding the outreach program to include workshops for students designed to foster trust between youth and law enforcement. As he walked out of the meeting, the memory of his conversation with Devon stayed with him. Devon's story was proof that change was possible, that the cycle of mistrust and fear could be broken when someone chose to see potential instead of failure. That evening, Ethan returned home, just as the sky was beginning to darken. Olivia was sitting on the porch swing, with a blanket draped over her legs and a book resting in her lap. "Long day?" she asked, as Ethan settled next to her. Ethan leaned back, letting the gentle creak of the swing soothe his tired mind. "Yes, but a good one. I ran into someone today, Devon Parker." Olivia's eyes widened with recognition. "The young man from that case a couple of years ago?" Ethan nodded. "He is doing well. He became an apprentice mechanic. He thanked me for giving him a second chance." Olivia smiled. "That must have felt good to hear." "It did," Ethan said, his voice soft. "He even offered to volunteer for the outreach program." Olivia reached for his hand. "You see? Those small chances you give people, they ripple outward." Ethan was quiet for a moment, staring out at the trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. "Devon reminded me why I am doing this. With everything that has happened, the pushback, Monroe's comments, it is easy to get lost in the frustration. But seeing him today brought it all back. We are not just fighting for a program. We are fighting for people like him, the ones who want to be seen for who they really are." Olivia rested her head against his shoulder. "And that is why you will win, because you see the humanity in people." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, letting the moment wash over him. The sound of crickets and the soft hum of distant conversation filled the air, creating a peaceful backdrop to their quiet reflection. "You know," Ethan said after a pause, "I think Devon might inspire more people than he realizes. Maybe I should bring him to one of the school workshops." Olivia nodded. "That is a wonderful idea. Kids need to see examples of resilience, people who have lived through hard times and come out stronger." Ethan smiled, already picturing Devon standing in front of a room full of teenagers, sharing his story. "You are right. They need to see that change is possible, no matter where you start." The next morning, Ethan reached out to Devon and asked him if he would be interested in sharing his story at an upcoming workshop. Devon's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "I would be honored." Ethan leaned back in his chair and felt a wave of renewed energy. The path ahead was still uncertain, but with people like Devon stepping forward, the future felt brighter. Hope had a way of multiplying, and Devon Parker was proof of that. The morning of the school workshop arrived bright and cool, with a soft breeze rustling the leaves outside the Fairford Community Center. Ethan Carter stood by the entrance, watching as students filed into the main hall, their laughter and conversations echoing through the space. Some were wide-eyed and curious, others shuffled in with slouched shoulders and wary glances. At the front of the room, a projector displayed the title of the workshop, "Building Trust, One Story at a Time." Ethan smiled softly as he greeted teachers and school administrators, grateful for their support. he spotted Devin Parker standing near the refreshment table, wearing a button-up shirt and jeans. Devin looked calm on the surface, but Ethan could see the nervous energy in his shifting feet. Ethan walked over and placed a reassuring hand on Devin's shoulder. "You ready?" Devin nodded, though he exhaled shakily. "A little nervous, but yeah, I am ready." Ethan smiled. "Just speak from the heart. They will see your sincerity." Devin's shoulders relaxed as he straightened up. "Thanks, Judge Carter. I won't let you down." "You already haven't," Ethan said warmly. The workshop began with introductions from the teachers and officers in attendance. Officer Harper was present, standing near the back with her arms crossed, not defensively, but thoughtfully observing. When it was Devin's turn to speak, the room grew quiet. He walked to the front, cleared his throat, and smiled nervously at the crowd of high school students. "Hey everyone, my name is Devin Parker, and I want to tell you a little bit about my story." There was a pause as he took a deep breath. "A couple of years ago, I made some bad choices. I fell in with the wrong crowd, and one day, I got caught stealing from a store. I could have ended up with a record that followed me for the rest of my life. But Judge Carter saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Instead of punishing me harshly, he gave me a chance to turn things around. And because of that second chance, I'm here today." The room was still, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Devin's voice grew steadier as he continued. "I won't lie, it wasn't easy. I had to work hard, make different choices, and cut ties with people who didn't want the best for me. But now, I have a job I'm proud of, a future I'm excited for, and I'm not ashamed of where I've been because it's part of what made me who I am." He looked out at the students, some of whom had begun to lean forward in their seats, captivated by his honesty. "I'm sharing this because I know what it feels like to think you don't belong, to feel like the world has already decided who you are. But I'm here to tell you, that's not true. You get to decide who you become." A few moments passed before the room erupted into applause. Devin's face flushed with pride as he stepped back, catching Ethan's approving nod. During the break, a few students approached Devin, asking him questions about his job and how he stayed focused during tough times. Devin answered each question thoughtfully, his confidence growing with every interaction. Officer Harper watched the scene unfold before approaching Ethan. "You were right about him," she said quietly. Ethan turned toward her. "He proved himself. I just gave him the opportunity." Harper folded her arms, watching Devin laugh with a group of students. "It makes me wonder how many other people out there are just one second chance away from a better life." Ethan's voice was gentle, but firm, "More than we realize, and that's why we have to keep doing the work." Harper nodded. "I'm in, all the way." By the end of the workshop, the energy in the room was different, lighter, filled with the quiet buzz of connection. Teachers, officers, and students lingered, continuing conversations long after the formal session had ended. Ethan stood near the door, shaking hands and exchanging kind words with those who passed by. As Devin packed up his notes, Marcus entered the room, a bright smile on his face. "I heard it went well," he said, clapping Devin on the back. Devin grinned. "It did. I think I made a difference." "You did," Marcus replied. "Trust me." Ethan watched them with a quiet sense of satisfaction. Devin had not just told his story, he had become part of something bigger. That evening, Ethan and Olivia sat together on their porch, their hands intertwined as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "How did it go?" Olivia asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "It was incredible," Ethan said, his voice full of quiet awe. Devin stood up there and shared his story like he'd been doing it his whole life. The students were hanging on every word. Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you and of him." Ethan stared out at the darkening sky, his heart full. You know, Liv, when this all started, I just wanted to make sure what happened to me never happened to someone else. But now, it feels like we're building something even bigger. We're creating a community where people feel seen, where they believe in second chances. Olivia smiled. That's what a legacy is, Ethan. It's not about court cases or titles, it's about the lives you touch along the way. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. Then I hope this is just the beginning. The soft hum of cicadas filled the air as fireflies blinked in the distance, tiny beacons of light against the deepening dusk. Ethan watched them, feeling a profound sense of peace. Fairford had come a long way, but there was still work to be done, and as long as there were stories to share, conversations to have, and people willing to grow, Ethan knew they were on the right path. With resilience, kindness, and hope, they had begun building something that would outlast them all, a legacy of trust, empathy, and second chances. As the town of Fairford took its first steps toward lasting change, Judge Ethan Carter's journey reminds us all of an important truth. Progress is not built in grand gestures, but in small acts of courage, understanding, and compassion. When we choose to listen instead of judge, to build bridges instead of walls, we create a community where everyone feels seen, valued, and heard. Stories like Devon's prove that second chances can change lives, and that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter where we begin. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what stories of resilience and hope you want to see next. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit, the importance of kindness, and the incredible impact we can have when we choose to believe in each other. Thank you for being a part of this journey together. We can spark real change. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in the power of second chances.